Hi, welcome to Local Time. My name's Amber Healy, and we have a special panel of guests today talking about self-publishing books. Our first guest is Jess Eyes, who's got a very unusual book about adventure?
Adventure in West Africa, actually.
Okay.
It's called In a Wild Place.
All right. We'll get back to you in just a second. I want to introduce our other guests also. We have John Link and Jolie Loveland Link, who are presenting an entirely different kind of book on Christmas, kind of sort of in a more traditional but different way.
All right.
That's very well put.
Okay. I'll come back to you in just a minute. Jess, why don't you tell us a little bit about your book and the inspiration for it?
Sure. So my book is called In a Wild Place, and it's adventure fiction with a little romance, of course.
Why not?
To make it interesting. And a lot of it is, it's a very simple plot. A young woman gets kidnapped in West Africa. She's doing research on malaria, and she's held for ransom. And her sister in Missouri, who's a creative writing school teacher, high school teacher, who's never really left the States before, has to go and try and save her. And it's telling the tale of how she finds her way to West Africa and how they manage to free her sister and who she meets along the way.
Wow, that sounds kind of intense.
Well, it's fun. It is intense. Actually, it is intense. It's meant to be an entertaining read. That, you know, it's also a path of self-discovery, because Jean, the protagonist, the one who goes in search of her sister, she's shy, and it's her story of self-discovery and how she learns how much we have inside ourselves when we're called upon to really act.
Okay. And you told me that in a way this book was sort of inspired by things in your life, but your sister is safe and sound and has never been abducted and taken anywhere.
So I do have a sister, and I've done a lot of traveling, and I actually have worked in West Africa before.
Okay.
So a lot of what I wrote about West Africa, the country and the people, is based on my experience there. Not all of it. The characters are purely fictional, but a lot of it is drawn on my experience in West Africa. The opening scene is interesting because I had just moved to DC about a year ago, and my sister lives in DC, and she left for work to go consult in Abu Dhabi.
Wow.
And I was sitting at home, and I was so lonely.
Sure.
Because I didn't know anybody in the city, and my sister had just left. And I sat down, and I love writing. I've always written since I was a child. And I sat down and I wrote the opening scene of my book, which is a young woman sitting in a library, lonely because her sister left to West Africa in this case, who wants to write a book.
And there it goes.
And that was what launched my story.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
The book that you ended with, or that you have now, is that the book you set out to write? Or did it sort of
It evolved.
change
It evolved along the way, I think, as we know that
Things
sometimes
happen.
books do evolve along the way. But I decided that I wanted to have a very simple plot, because I think with fiction, the simplest plots are the best. In this case, woman gets kidnapped, sister goes and saves woman.
You just gave away the ending.
No, trust me.
It's the middle part that matters.
There's a lot. I didn't tell you what happens with her love interest.
Oh, that's true.
You'll have to read it to find out.
Of course, of course. And you decided to self-publish this. It sounded, from what we've talked about a little before we started filming here today, it sounded like, that was always from the get-go, that's what you were going to do. And we can get into the process about that later, but why not go through, something a little more formal?
Sure. So from the very beginning, even before I really, right when I started it, I knew I was going to self-publish, because I love to write. And I want to focus my energy on becoming a great novelist and becoming a great author. And this is my first novel. I hope it's good, but I don't think genius happens overnight. I think you have to really work at it. And so I did the best I could on this novel. I've spent a lot of time editing it, and I'm proud of it. But I didn't want to spend my time searching for an agent.
Sure.
Because it can take months, if not years, to find an agent who will represent your book, who will then find a publishing company. And that's not what I want to do, because today we have the option of self-publishing, and I can get my name out there as a journalist, or as a journalist. I've done that too. Okay, yeah. But I can get my name out there as an author, and then continue publishing a couple more books. And at that point, well, I have some leverage. Maybe a publisher will come to me. Maybe I will have more ties and connections, and I can go to a publisher. But I don't want to spend my time searching for a publisher when I have the capacity to self-publish. It's free, and and then I can continue to focus on my writing.
Sure. Do you have ideas lined up for your next book or 5?
I do. I actually have a lot of ideas.
Oh, that's great. Can you give us a sneak peek?
Okay, well,
early in the
I'm
process?
no, it's not too early. I'm gonna continue this series with these two sisters, but I'm thinking that one of the books that I want to do next would actually be a love story between an American woman and a Chinese man.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
Because a lot of times, first of all, there's huge cultural differences between Americans and Chinese. And also, you almost always see in interracial couples between Asians and Americans or white people, you see a white man with an Asian woman.
Right.
And I would love to craft a story based on a young white American woman who falls in love with a Chinese man and tell the story of how they overcome their cultural barriers.
Maybe a little different.
Yeah, a little bit different,
Sure.
but it would still have elements of adventure, of course.
Of course.
You know,
Gotta have that.
to keep it interesting. So.
As an adventure book that has a little romance in it, the novel that you finish now, who's your target audience? Are you looking at the ever so popular young adult reader? Are you looking for someone a little more, on her own into the world a bit?
Maybe a little bit. I think it could actually honestly attract a lot of different types of people. I wouldn't necessarily say it's for young teenagers, because I think maybe we should look for a bit of a more mature audience. But I think it could actually be attractive to both men and women, because there are the main male character actually has, I really worked hard to make him be a complex, relatable character. Spoke a lot with friends of mine who've been in the military, because this character himself is in the military. And I don't want to set stereotypes to what people like, because men and women can like all different kinds of things.
Of course.
But there's some action scenes. There's some, the actual moment when they rescue Lizzie, who's the young woman who got kidnapped, is quite
Emotional?
engaging. Yeah, it's very quick paced. So.
Is your sister okay with, her role in inspiring some of the events that take place in the book?
Oh yeah, she's absolutely fine with it.
Okay.
And what's interesting is I started with these two characters thinking one would be based on myself and one would be based on my sister. But what happened is that it's almost as though each character represented a part of myself.
Okay.
That's sort of how it evolved. And then, like all characters in a book, I think they take on a life of their own as you write about it.
Okay. Were you surprised by how these parts of yourself came out through the course of the writing?
Yes, I was, because one character, I've always been a bit of an introvert extrovert, so I've struggled with being shy, but at the same time I love people, so it's been something that I've always kind of worked with since I was young. And one of my characters is very outgoing, very gregarious, very charismatic, and the other character is shy and reserved and feels self-conscious. And I think in that sense I was able to take two sides of my personality and then run with it, because I think some of the best fiction writing is based on our own personal experiences, which we elaborate and
we can all see parts of ourselves if we look for them, if we want to acknowledge that we have these different parts to ourselves in there. Before I move on, just wanted to know, where can people find your book?
Oh, sure. So you can find it on Amazon.com.
Okay.
Just search for In a Wild Place by Jess Eyes, E-I-S-E.
Okay.
And then I also have a Facebook page.
Of course.
Which people can find me. It's facebook.com/Jess Eyes Writer.
To distinguish yourself from others
There
that might
are
be
many
out
other
there.
Jess eyes that may be out there.
Hey, you
so.
never, we all have twins.
Yeah.
One way or another. All right, turning over to our other guests tonight, John and Jolie. Thank you for driving in. Had a bit of a detour before, but your book is a completely different kind of adventure, I would say, than what Jess has written about here. Tell me a little bit about your book, Return of the Three Kings.
Well, our book actually grew out of our own experience of really feeling gypped by Christmas. That we had found ourselves being slammed up against Christmas Eve and then dropped off a cliff over and over, and felt that there was some just missing elements, that Christmas had a depth and a meaning and a resonance that we could find if we searched for it. And so we began searching for it. And the first couple of years, we started a little tradition which began on Christmas Day, which is the first of the 12 days of Christmas, and went through January 6th, which is Epiphany.
I've always wondered how that worked.
It's
What the 12 days
it's
are.
a secret world. Nobody talks about it. Catholics and Episcopalians know about the 12 days and the journey to Epiphany, but they don't even talk about it much anymore. It's an old country thing, and it's an old Christmas thing.
Sure.
And so we thought, we have found a secret treasure that we're going to take advantage of. And so we started having little celebrations every day instead of a big glut deluge of presents and brouhaha, as typically happens at Christmas time.
One of the things I remember about Christmas was that it was, you'd have the big, Christmas phantasmagoria, and suddenly it's over with. And now we had a chance to extend that whole period. And since we typically were unprepared, the real advantage was that we could, in fact, now take advantage of after Christmas sales.
Hey.
And we had more time to shop, and we had, and so what we focused on was trying to find things we'd do like a little reading each day, and then we'd have like a giving each other a present, and the point being was that it wasn't the size of the present. It could be like a dollar store, it could be a coupon, a back rub or something like that. But it was a sense that you had that one moment, that one exchange, that was more powerful than everything all at once, because you couldn't focus on it all.
Sure.
And so it's about really learning how to give and receive again. Because a lot of people don't realize that the Christmas giving component, which incorporates some of the Mithraic rites out of the Roman Empire, also is about sort of reenacting the three kings, which is since the three magi, giving gifts to the Christ child. And so when we give gifts to each other, we're essentially trying to give gifts to the divine within each other. And so it's not just a, hey, make sure we get that special thing and, make them happy. But so a lot of the book focuses on both the historical, talks a lot about the inner psychological journey, and the other thing that it focuses on is the logistics, because it's very complicated to do.
Sure.
And since we don't really, it's a new tradition, and it has to be reimagined for each family. But there's also some very cool things associated with that, such as if you have a loved one who's distant, you can give them you can have them 12 little presents in a box and a different reading each day, so that it's not just the one day, it's multiple days, and so it really takes that feeling from the everything all at once to nothing, to now moving from a sprint to a marathon. So it's a really different experience at Christmas, and we wouldn't go back.
It's kind of a nice idea. It's totally different, and for people who aren't patient, it's probably really you're gonna make me wait longer. But there's something nice about that anticipation and the waiting, because it's not over before it starts.
It seems
Well, I
like
have
you
to
can
keep-
also savor it.
Yeah, I have to give some props to the Institute of Marriage Encounter, which is where we kind of got the idea for how much can be accomplished in 20 minutes. And we sometimes go longer than that, but we try to hold it to 20 minutes because people will do that.
Sure.
In Marriage Encounter, they talk about having communication skills that they're teaching people. And they have little talk sessions each day, and that's it. You're supposed to be done at the end of 20 minutes. So it happens, it gets done. And so our little ceremony is very, very brief. Now, I've got some stories I want to read this year that are going to take longer than 20 minutes, I must say. But typically, our readings will fit into that 20 minutes, and then we have the sharing time where we talk about what the meaning of that day's event is, and then it's done.
The readings really, I mean, one of the things that's very interesting is just the experience of reading out loud to each other. We don't do that
Nobody
very often.
does that
Not
anymore.
after, what, kindergarten maybe?
Pretty
Right,
much.
exactly.
And so
yeah.
what that does is it creates a sort of plants a seed of a inner journey, and then the experience of talking and sharing about it, and then sharing the gifts, just makes it kind of a rich experience. And so that's that's the goal of it.
Tell me a little bit about the readings that you have, or that you've highlighted in your books. From what I understand, they're not just strictly Bible stories.
Correct.
There's a bit of a wider range of material there.
Exactly. In fact, we started out with the 4 Gospels. And so 4 years in a row, we just read the Gospels. And that was really, really neat, actually, for us, because you don't listen to those words typically. And there we were, really listening to those words. But then we wanted to broaden, and we started taking in readings from world religions. We both love Rumi and other Sufis, and there's Buddhist readings that are wonderful. And so we had those in part of our reading experience. And then we moved into more secular readings.
I understand your son may have played a role in that.
Yeah, exactly so. We have a son who's fairly dogmatically not religious.
Okay.
And so we put up, we really honored that. And we know a lot of people have that in their families. So we wanted to create an inclusive experience for all families so that they could gather together and enjoy one another and share purpose and meaning with one another without having to be one type of experience.
Wow, that's quite a range. I can't, I wouldn't necessarily automatically think of, here's a passage from, a Buddhist text to read during Christmas time. But if it works out, that's wonderful.
Well, we say in the book 4 times, peace on earth, goodwill to all men. Well, what does that mean? Right?
Sure.
Everybody
is everybody. All is all.
Everybody's everybody.
Sure.
Exactly.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I understand that you also uncovered through your research some a little more, I don't want to say offbeat, but some traditions and some characters that might not be known to people around the world. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, one of the things that as we looked into the 12 days tradition, we started sort of exploring how Christmas is celebrated around the world. And one of the things we find is that there were certain elements that sort of show up, one of which is the fact that Christmas is a time of darkness. I mean, we think about the alignment of Christmas with the winter solstice was very intentional, and it sort of aligns with the idea that the darkest day, the shortest day of the year, the darkest time, is actually the beginning of the rebirth of the year. And so the idea that Jesus' birthday was aligned with that time, which is part of how that all came to be.
The rite of the festival of Saturnalia was really a lead-in to Christmas, a lot of Christmas festivities.
And so, what we also found is that, there's like, if we think about Christmas Carol, it's a dark ghost story. But it's really from that same tradition, and apparently in England and in parts of the U.S. they used to have ghost stories on Christmas Eve. So that was part of it. And there's this whole other dark characters. One's called Krampus, who comes from sort of Eastern Europe, who used to go around with Saint Nick. And literally, St. Nick would be giving the good kids presents, and Krampus, of course, is this demonic character who would, in fact, kidnap bad kids, put them into a sack, and carry them off to Spain. I mean,
Of all places.
Well, and if you're in Czechoslovakia or Poland, being carried off to Spain is not a very, it's not a vacation.
You don't know where you're
and
going.
you have no idea what's going to happen to you, and so that's
Wow.
pretty scary. So, Krampus, and there's the American version of that was a character's name is Bells Nichols, which was taking something very similar to that. Bells Nichols would dress up in these guys would dress up in these scary outfits, go around to houses, and make all these kinds of scary noises. And if they were responded to positively, they would come in and play music and have gifts and things. And if they didn't, they would continue to scare the kids.
It sounds kind of like Halloween meets Christmas caroling.
Exactly.
Trick or treat, or
Yeah.
The original
and then we'll
good
sing together.
the original good cop, bad cop routine.
But
Right.
it's really not rare. There's Befana in Italy. There's Black Peter in Holland. There's, in fact, the U.S. is sort of sanitized out that darker aspect of Christmas, and as though we're sort of driven to have a good time and lose sight of the complexity of that time of year and the depth of what people can be looking for.
One of the things that we try and deal with in the book is the fact that many people, have to deal with dark emotions during Christmas. People have, still dealing with grief in their lives, and in many ways, the Christmas amplifies that. It makes it worse. It makes people feel, and they feel guilty about feeling grief. And then they feel guilty about the grief, and so they set these and in fact, it's one of the times of the year with the highest suicide rates. So one of the things that we suggest in there is that people, in fact, embrace their grief. Not overdo it, but that they provide a space to deal with the sense of loss.
Because not everybody does have happy for the end of December into early January. Charlie Brown Christmas, one of my all-time favorites. One of the opening scenes is Charlie Brown and Linus. I feel sad. I feel like I'm wrong for feeling sad.
Right. Yeah.
There's something wrong with me. Charlie Brown, what's wrong with you? Everyone else is happy. Why can't you be in a good mood?
Yeah.
Not everybody feels that way. And plus it's dark this time of year, and that makes people feel kind of down in the dumps, and the weather's bad.
Right. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. If people want to feel sad, they can.
Yeah.
That's a human emotion.
Well,
Why not?
one of the things we did discover in our research that was fascinating was that in early United States, early America, there were actually two camps, a war on Christmas by
sounds
Christian against Christian. So much for the popular conception of the war on Christmas. The Puritans were very adamant that decorations and singing and presents and gaiety were wrong. And in fact, people were fined for hanging Christmas decorations for about 30 years.
Wow.
And so it was the Puritans, the Congregationalists, versus the Unitarians, Catholics, and some other Protestants that were much more into merriment and parties and dancing.
Oh my goodness.
Thoreau has actually a little passage that we have in the book where he talks about when he used to hang Christmas stockings and that other people in his neighborhood didn't do that.
Clearly a rebel from the get-go. Before we run out of time, I understand you both went the self-publishing route. Oh, that's right. You have a copy of
There
your
you go.
And,
front
and of
here.
course, the name of our book is The Return of the Three Kings, and it's subtitled Reclaiming the 12 Days of Christmas.
From Christmas to Epiphany.
Epiphany. And available again on Amazon, both as a softback or as a Kindle book.
And why did you decide to self-publish, and how did all of you go about, getting started? How does someone start if they want to self-publish a book?
Well, it's a strategic decision that is based on the fact that now we can do it. Years ago, there used to be so expensive to publish a book because the old mechanical presses required you to publish a minimum of 1,000 just to have it anywhere near feasible.
Oh wow.
And so there used to be these vanity presses all over the place that would publish 1,000 books, but most of the times that people would give them to their friends, and they'd have 900 books in their garage, and they'd have no way to distribute them. Amazon obviously made it now that distribution a whole nother thing. It makes it very easy to distribute because it's available to the world. The second thing is that publishing on demand, which essentially allows them to create a single book at a time, at the same cost as if it were, 1,000 books, is changes everything.
What did you use for publishing on demand, actually? Because I was thinking, mine is,
You went to Create Space.
Yeah.
And that's who we went with.
Okay.
And that's the model that they basically have perfected to some extent. There are other smaller publishers who are, and they sort of exist. There are some who are still the old vanity presses who are still will try and lure you into doing the vanity press route. There are a few publishing on demand smaller houses that are out there that are sort of catering to the indie book market, but Create Space has a relationship with Amazon, which I think gives it a kind of an immediate edge. That that you're gonna have that distribution channel open.
I would really like to encourage people that are going to self-publish that they have a buddy or some kind of moral support, because it's not easy. I think 3 or 4 years from now it will be easy. It's not easy yet. We're now putting up websites through GoDaddy. Simple. 3 years ago, not simple. And it's like that, I think. But for our paperback version, John, we couldn't get the headers and footers to work right. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you really run into. And the page numbers were just wacko. He had to re-input every chapter by hand.
Oh, wow.
And that worked. But it took forever.
Sure.
So it's not for the faint-hearted. You have to persevere.
It is much easier when you're doing fiction that doesn't have any pictures. Your life is much easier. You are much happier when you do nonfiction or fiction with pictures. You're into a much more complicated world, both in the regular book and in the ebook, because it just creates complications. But one of the things that you find is that the places like Create Space and any other these folks are more than glad to sell you services.
Sure.
So if money's not an object to you, and they will help you out. But
And what was your experience like, Jess? Did things go pretty smoothly?
I actually had a very positive experience with Create Space. I had the whole process actually has not cost me any money, but that's because I've had a lot of talented, kind people who have, out of a labor of love, helped me. By that I mean a very good friend of mine who's a graphic designer designed the cover for me.
Good.
And I've had dear friends edit for me, and editing is definitely critical for the process. But I think the hardest thing about self-publishing is marketing.
Sure.
Because you have to market yourself.
And you mentioned you have a Facebook page where people can find your book and learn a little bit about it. Do you have something like that set up also?
We do, yeah.
It's the wave of the future, kids.
Yeah, it is.
well, and all the social media that you can use, you have to just you have to be fearless, and you have to put out what's going on there. Twitter, everything. There are now. You have to be willing. Depending on how much effort you want to put into it, you have to have some expectations of what can be accomplished. If you're willing to bring in a public relations firm who can get you an interview on television, or you might just have something that is such a YouTube sensation, and that everybody says, let's call you up.
Sure.
It's really a very hit and miss thing. This is very different from the world 20 years ago, where it really was gatekeeper after gatekeeper after gatekeeper, keeping the non-author class out.
Right.
And now it's very democratized. The good news is that it's democratized. The bad news is that now the expectations for you have to prove your book's value.
Sure.
And you have to market yourself.
One thing I wouldn't want to lose is that there is a great and increasing abundance of free graphics available online. People are starting to give away whole libraries of museums. And I worked with Gutenberg a lot because they're obviously out of copyright and free.
Sure.
But it's just, you can get some really neat stuff now for publishing that wasn't even possible 5 years ago.
Okay. Well, it sounds like the key in self-publishing is self, whether it's promotion or editing or finding graphics. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I just want to thank you all for being here, and thank you for watching. We'll see you again soon with another edition of Local Time.